Hello, everyone. This is another regenerative conversation, and this time I'm with Sam Miekle. And Sam and I met a couple of years back, and it was only just this year that we really got involved in getting to know each other more, and that is through the Belonging Book Club. And um, this is also one of the yes, special moments of this year was being part of the Belonging Book Club. And that's when I got to know more about Sam's practices and especially her views on restoration and regeneration. So, Sam, would you want to introduce yourself, what it is that you do, and how you're a big part of this healing profession?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm so happy to be here, and a warm welcome to everyone watching. I know that there are different lockdowns and restrictions going on around the world, so thinking of you if you are being impacted by them at this time. My name's Sam. I was saying to Lana, I think about healing quite a lot. So I work in healthcare. I'm not a clinician by background, so I don't heal people with my knowledge and skills, but I try and heal the systems that organize the delivery of care. And how do we design care so that it doesn't become a big block to people getting well and being well? That's what I do day to day. And a lot of that is helping decision makers in healthcare systems understand what matters to patients, to families, to staff members, and then designing systems based on what is most important to people, not what is the easiest thing or the most cost-effective thing, even though they are important factors. So that's what I do in my day-to-day.
Yeah, and Sam, before the call, we were talking about this model that you have, the concentric circles of suffering. Would you want to tell us more about it? And I'm curious to explore this with you.
Thank you. I don't love the name, so I'm open to what the name is. So through my work, I talk to thousands and thousands of people and hear their experiences. And I created this model as a way of looking, almost identifying the levels of suffering that I can control, or not control, but I can contribute to relieving, versus those that's somebody else's gift to look at. So there's 5 concentric circles, and at the heart of it is the person and the disease or the condition that they have. So why is it that they've come into the healthcare system? So if we take myself, for example, I had very severe COVID 18 months ago before the first lockdown. So I would say the condition that I had was COVID. That's my primary level of suffering. And for yourself, knowing some of your background, that would be your breast cancer diagnosis all of those years ago. The next level is then around suffering, which can happen through the treatment of the original condition, long-term side effects, and the consequences of having had that experience. So even though for me, my COVID experience went into my lungs, when that healed, I had a lot of fatigue. I had all of this brain fog and I couldn't work for 6 months. So it was kind of the side effects, the consequences of that initial condition.
Yeah, I can think about like with after chemotherapy, there's also brain fog that happened, and also muscle loss. It's very common as well for patients, or even up until now, the area that I had radiation is still tender.
And those 2 circles, the suffering there is for the healthcare profession and all of the supporting around that. So I see a lot of that suffering, but that's not something that I feel I can contribute to. So my focus has been the 3rd circle, which I call the coordination or uncoordination of care. So how do you navigate the healthcare system? How do you find it? What is your experience? So for me in COVID, I was diagnosed at the peak and I couldn't get into hospital because the hospitals were full. And that amount of suffering for me, I couldn't access the care. And that raised so much fear, so much uncertainty, and in truth, a lot of anger for the care profession, because at the time that I needed them the very most in my life, they weren't there for me. And even now I can feel it going, there's still, that was and is a lot of suffering.
Mm. Yeah, and I can imagine that this coordination or lack of coordination can also be with other professionals, like say for example physiotherapist or psychologist. One of the things that I was baffled after treatments was I didn't know what to do, like, so what can I do? And even my oncologist said, oh, you just go back to how your life was. And I was like, but there's no going back to how life was. And upon reading about it, I realized that actually depression is very high after treatment for those who have gone through chemotherapy. And for me, it's just like, oh, there's such a big lack, such a big gap in terms of how we can support people. And it seems like, oh, after treatment, you're done. And then that's it.
That's such a huge part of our work. So many healthcare and social care services are designed around the building that the people are employed in. So the pathway starts when the piece of paper that is your referral comes into the computer and you walk through the door. And so part of our work is, how do you understand the person's journey beyond the building, the context of their life, what is important to them, what does quality of life look like, and then design processes and pathways that are much more inclusive than the physical building that the service is contained within. So that's been my work for 6 years now. And in my COVID experience, I realized there's two more circles. So the fourth circle is suffering that can come from the stories that people tell us.
Oh.
So for example, some people said to me when I shared that I had COVID, oh my God, you're going to die. Is that frightening? Oh, let's hope not. Mm-hmm. Other people said, it's so great that you've got COVID because you don't have to work and you can like binge on Netflix. Like, what an opportunity. Some people like, there's no such thing as COVID. It's a government conspiracy, da 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 da. So
the dismissal of your experiences.
Completely. And a lot of that comes from people's fear of what is it that you might be going through? How does that affect them? And a large part of that for me is learning about what good boundaries are.
Oh, I can definitely relate to what you're saying. I know there was an incident where someone I used to be friends with, it was just like, oh, if you want to change, you just change. And I was just like, and that was the first time in I would say in years that I walked out on a person, because I'm like, I'm not getting into this conversation. So it's so right about the boundary setting.
And that's not something I was well practiced in at all. People pleaser number one. But I really had to learn. And so my recovery was very lonely because I said to a lot of people, I can't. So this is my space. This is where I'm working to recover. And I will see you all on the other side.
Yeah.
And that leads to the biggest circle of suffering, I think, which is the stories we tell ourselves. And I realized as still I'm realizing, many of the stories we tell ourselves are not true. But how do we have awareness of what those stories are? Yeah. How do we start to articulate them and then share them with trusted people, if that's appropriate, or start to reframe that level of suffering? So a big one for me, while I had physically recovered over 6 months, and I had some amazing mental health support, because I was having a lot of flashbacks and trigger points to these very, very intensely frightening moments. My world had become so small, and I felt incapable of doing anything. So my story was, I need to keep myself small. The therapist told me I can do 1 hour of things a day. If I do more than that, I will relapse. And so I shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. And 18 months on, that story is just, I can let that go.
I can imagine how challenging it is also to let go of the stories, because they've kept us safe, right? They've kept us sane, and they've kept us physically intact. So it seems like, oh, but that has been my lifeline while I was going through treatment, while I was going through this illness. And now you're telling me that I need to let go of that?
And I had this most amazing physiotherapist who used to be a professional footballer. And he said, okay, do a plank. I said, oh, I can't do planks. I'm not strong enough. And he said, stop. I need you to let go of the story you're telling yourself, that you are weak, that you cannot heal, and you need to believe that it's possible to be well. I said, no, sorry, I am not a well person. That's not who I am. I need to protect myself. I need to be really careful with myself. And he's like, okay, we'll do it together. And I can still feel it now, that release of holding myself up was just so liberating, to be like, okay, my body knows it's ready. My body can do this. And my mind has just got this fear and control of keep safe, keep small. We can be okay in this moment, if we don't do that hard thing.
Oh, I totally can relate to this. I know that there was a very, I would say, very transformational period in this, stories. Was when I think I had the diagnosis a couple of days before, and I was at home, and I was talking to my husband and to my friends, and I realized that a big part of the stories that I was sharing was stories about my mom, because my mom passed away from breast cancer, metastasized breast cancer. And I realized that, oh, wait a minute. And I was like, how come I'm using her story as my story? And I just had this big jolt of, ooh, which is my story to tell. And that's when I started noticing how, how I share my experiences, and how I framed it in such a way that, hey, her story was 20 years ago. Medicine is not as great as how it is now. And it helped me. It helped me when, well, my daughter, she was 7 years old at that time. And I can still remember we're sitting on the sofa, and then out of the blue, she asked me, and this is one of the most painful questions that I've heard. Mama, will I have it too? And I was just stumped. I was like, it felt too long, but I knew it was just seconds of silence. And I told her, well, honey, we don't know. We don't know what the future brings. We don't know how things would go. What we know is the medical field has been improving a lot. It has improved from my mom's time to my time. And who, who knows, maybe there won't be any breast cancer, yeah, in the future, because of how we've been progressing. And when I heard myself say that story, I was just like, get at the back, mama, that was so good. And I was like, there was no, what's this, attachment of my mom's story and my story, so that she can have her own story. And that for me was so liberating.
Completely. It creates a different space for her and for you to play and to be in.
Exactly. But this is also the part, right? Like, we were never trained to listen to the stories and to capture ourselves in terms of what are the stories that we're sharing, and how are we sharing it, and who we're sharing it with. I don't know about you, but when I was going through treatments, one of the most difficult questions that I ask every day is, how are you? Like, how do you answer, how are you? To the point that it depends on different people. I'll be like, oh, what do you want to know more of? How I'm doing physically, what I'm doing, how I'm doing mentally. Yeah, it became different filters as well, based on who's asking. If it's a very close friend, I can just dive deep and say, oh, this has been shitty. Blah, blah, blah. But if it's someone that's just an acquaintance, I ask, in what ways would you want to know more about how I'm doing?
It's such a powerful question, and a moment of unlocking. Transformation is a big word, but I think I'm going to use it here. Sometimes in my journal, I just put that at the top. How am I? And to tell the truth to myself on the page, and not be like, yeah, it's great, we're going along, it's fine. But like, how am I? What do I need? And this wonderful friend and teacher, Lee, who I went on a retreat that she was running a couple of weeks ago. It was a virtual retreat, all hosted online. Absolutely amazing. So 3 nights, Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night. And she had 9 sessions. And what was amazing is all women in the circle, we're all in our beds. So we've got pillows and cushions and in our PJs, and that in itself created a different space and kind of conversation. It kind of cut through lots of layers because you're in your safety. And she kept asking this question. At first I was really annoyed by it because she'd say, what do you need from this session? I was like, Lee, it's a 45-minute session. We need to get on with it. But she was training us to say, what is it that you need? What is it that you most want? And I think as women, we're not always good at identifying that need to ourselves and then articulating it to say, actually,
Yeah. Oops. I think there was a slight glitch there with my connection. I One of the things that I did, because I was at the time that I got diagnosed, I started taking nonviolent communication classes. One of the things that I did, and that still, up until now, I still have a practice. Um, there was a time when after chemotherapy, normally my husband would stay with me after chemotherapy. But for that day, he had to go to work. So he was like, okay, I have to go to work. And I was the only one at home. And I was so furious. I was like, ah, hours have passed. He hasn't even messaged me. He hasn't even asked how I'm doing. And then it's like a brick, that falls on your head, and you're like, what am I doing? I'm 37 years old, and I'm still waiting for somebody else to ask me how I'm doing, so that I would just know how I am doing. So I created a pattern for myself, an alarm for myself of 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 6 o'clock. And it's just an alarm on my phone that says, "How are you doing, Lana?" So every time with the alarms, I had to check in, and my kids started seeing it, and the kids were like, "Mama, what are you doing?" And my kids were 5 and 7 at that time, and I told my son, and I was like, "I'm checking in with myself." And he started seeing me do it so frequently that he was like, he just came home from school one day, and then he said, "Mama, how are you doing?" And then I said, "Oh, today was fine." So I started sharing. And then he blurted out, it's like, "You know what, Mama? I'm going to check in with you every day after school and ask you how you're doing." And he did that, at 5 years of age. And he does that even up until now. How was your morning? Both of them, how did you sleep? How was your call? And was it something that you learned? So there's this it just feels so good to have that, of that it's a very common practice of checking in with each other, of checking in with yourself. And to the point that we had needs cards in the bathroom. So when you go to our toilet, now we don't have it, but before, you would see, how are you feeling today? So sit on the toilet bowl, you'll just see that card, and then you can choose from that. Like, here's a list of emotions.
But if we could all name our emotions and be aware of what we're showing up with, wouldn't that eliminate 99% of all of the problems in the world? Maybe
Exactly.
that's generous, but
Exactly. And also that, like what you said, it's so tied into the stories, right? So if we know how we are within ourselves, then it's also easier to share what's going on.
it's easy to share. And I've learned, I think this is my learning around the boundaries as well. Do I have energy for this?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Can I contribute to this? Or is
yes.
this the kindest thing I can say, thank you, and not right now?
Oh, yes. Yes.
And this came through as part of my recovery. I was working with this therapist. And again, my busy, quick mind was like, oh, this is such an annoying exercise. But I had to, I'm a very visual person. So I created a little bucket and I would look at energy deposits and withdrawals. And I had to do this much like you, morning, noon, and night. What is taking my energy? What am I choosing to give my energy? And the really hard part for me, how am I restoring that energy?
Yes.
And I had to let go of a narrative, which I still am working on, that rest and restoration is for weakies.
You should not be resting.
What are you doing, you lazy person? This is not a productive use of your
You
time.
should not be napping. Oh gosh, I love my naps, by the way.
And that rest is not scrolling on your phone. It's not watching Netflix
Yeah.
in a mindless way. So
Yeah.
if it is a mindful chat with people using your phone, sure. But I really had to learn, do I have the energy to contribute? And if my bucket then goes down, how am I filling that up with things?
One of my mentors, Michelle Ginati, um, she shared with me in a call, and this is a line that I've kept, own the energy you bring in the room. And that's something that I was like, okay, I'm committed to that, of owning my energy. Yet, if I don't know the energy that I'm bringing, how can I do that, right? So it was really that, like what you said, understanding how my energy fluctuates.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also why I've taken out coffee, because for me it was like caffeine. Ever since that I've started drinking coffee, was a way to prolong my day. It was a way to, oh, I have deadlines in the evening, let's drink coffee, and that would keep me awake up until the next day. Basically, it's that. So for me, when I started taking caffeine out, started to realize, oh, when does my body need the rest? When do I have clear energy to do stuff? And that's why I started then putting in that boundaries of, oh, my mornings are sacred, especially the early morning. So if I start cleaning up the house, it's a waste of my energy. And this is why then we had this discussion at home of, yeah, it means the kitchen needs to be in order so that the next day I won't get into a frenzy of cleaning. Rather, I'll just get into my own creative time. And that puts in all this, the boundary setting, the understanding of your energy, the asking of support. I think that was for me also the very crucial was understanding I can't do this on my own. Especially I have my husband, I have my kids. So how can I get them also involved in this? And funny enough, I would say one of the best decisions that I've made was telling my kids, mommy's not available. And that was such it's like in my culture, being a Filipino, that is something that you would never ever hear. You're like, how can you not be available to your own kids? You're like, I
You
can hear all the
selfish
judgments.
you.
I can hear all the judgments already, and this is why one of my best friends from the Philippines, she asked, can you parent in the same way that you're parenting now that you're living outside of the Philippines? And I said, in the Philippines, no, because I can hear that, I can hear the conversations, I can hear, and like what you said, these are the part of the suffering, right? The many stories that our culture, our families would be saying, and to a point, it's great when we can just say, okay, wait a minute, let's put boundaries to it.
And there's a quote that I shared in the Belonging book group by a woman called Maureen Murdoch. And she said, the stories that we tell ourselves is the way we will live our life. And we have choice over those stories. So we don't like how it's going, great, create a new story. And that's not meaning that you get up and leave your house and never come back. Some people might want to do that. But how are you experiencing everything in your life, and what choices do you have to start changing those little things?
And this part of the choices, right? So for myself, I know that, oh, I'm so used to this paradigm of I'm being selfish or I'm being selfless. So it's just like these two polarities. Either you're in that camp or you're in the other camp. So it was for me so liberating to know about selffulness. Like, oh, wait a minute. When I choose for myself, it's not, you know, it's not selfishness. It's selffulness. And this is the part that's. Oh, can you hear me now? Sam, can you hear me?
I can. There you go. We're back.
There you go. This is the everybody's in lockdown, so everybody's home. Everybody's
Exactly.
taking the bandwidth. Anyway, so yeah, understanding selffulness really helped me to say, oh, wait a minute, this is what they mean by, when the plane is crashing, attend to yourself first, put on your mask first, because that would help others. And that for me was like having a language for that helped a lot as a practice. And I know you have other practices. So I'm curious to know your other practices as well.
Well, in the past, so I think there's a spirit adopting is a spirit of curiosity for how do I help myself feel full? How do I nourish myself? And it did me a yoga nidra practice, which is very, very deep rest in the body. And she would say to me, often when we teach yoga, we say, breathe into the body. And she said, Sam, you are next level because you are breathing into the breath. That is your pain. So we will breathe into the breath. So I've spent a lot of time. How do I deeply rest in my body? And that's taken me on a journey through lots of different meditations. I can't remember how I came across it, but I started practicing with a wonderful woman called Kirsty, who does moon cycle meditations. So every new moon and every full moon, we do it. As she says, it's not a full yoga practice. Yoga is the shorthand for it, but how do you move through your body? And how do you start to take a theme for each new moon cycle, each full moon cycle, and take those stories and embody them? And that could be letting them go. It could be creating something new from them. So that's a practice that I've been exploring and playing with.
Oh, this is something that's just very new for me as well, about the moon cycles. And and this is very fascinating for me because there's really a different energy, right? Of what it brings.
Mm-hmm.
And right now for me it's also being able to notice what the energy is and what it's asking from me. Because for me that was also like, oh yeah, we can be tuned in to the moon, it's just that it's not within our lived experience, it's not within my lived experience. So for me it's understanding, okay, how do I sleep when it's a full moon, or actually not sleep. Or how energetic I am, like, oh, when it's a new moon, like, there's a creativity there. Yeah, so it's nice to be able to harness those.
And for me, like so many people, it's been such a turbulent 12 or 18 months. And there's something magnificent for me to think I am a small being on this planet. And the moon, every 29.5 days, is going to ebb and flow and cycle through. And she will always be there. And we can be thrashing about or deeply resting. And there's that presence and groundedness that the moon's going to keep doing her thing. She's going to be cycling through her phases. And she's just waiting for us to be like, okay, I'm ready now to pay attention.
uh that part, of I'm ready now to pay attention. And I would, and for me this is why this regenerative conversations really came about, is because of, and noticing that there's different ways in which we can bring in restorative practices in our lives. There's different ways in which we can think of, what nourishes me, what replenishes me, what gives me energy. and and yeah, this like tapping into to the moon cycle is a very interesting thing. So given that, yeah, we're I do hope we can have a longer period to have this conversation, but we're really making it short. So, what do you think, are your top tips to say for anyone who would like to start getting into more restorative practices?
I think start so small and don't make it a to-do. Don't add it to your to-do list. Lee and Shauna, who ran this retreat, had the most lovely advice. Make it the smallest, simplest thing that you can do. So it might be a cup of tea, but it's the commitment, the ritual around, I will have a cup of tea at 10:30 and I will take 10 minutes and I will go sit with no devices, no distractions. And I will come back to myself. And then maybe once that feels okay, you can go, what would it be like to take a walk in nature by myself for an hour, for 2 hours? What would it be like to practice a meditation? Lee invited me in to do a silent retreat. It was only 24 hours. That was a really daunting experience. So I think perhaps don't jump in straight to a silent meditation or do. I think it's, my advice would be to explore and not to be fixed to say, okay, well, I said I'm going to do tea at 10:30. I will do that now every day for the rest of my life. And when I don't do that, I'm a failure. So to start small with that. I think there's something around being aware of what the stories are that we're telling ourselves. So that might be starting at the top of a page, how am I today? And giving yourself the permission to explore that really honestly and truthfully. And the bonus question would be, what do I most need? And then to practice asking for that. And then I was reflecting on my own COVID journey. One of my biggest fears became laughter. Because when you can't breathe, anything that makes you breathless can trigger you back into a moment of, I need to keep myself safe. So no laughter, no sex, no nothing that is going to get your lungs working, no rigorous exercise. And I think throughout we need to hold this all lightly, and we need to not take ourselves seriously and create really heavy burdens of rituals to restore ourselves that then become a heavy weight for us. So to keep it light, to keep it fun, and that sense of play.
Oh, thank you, Sam. And I can imagine anyone who will be watching this would definitely have some food for thought in terms of how they can apply, restorative practices in their lives, and also keep it, like what you said, keep it fun, keep it light, and I would say give it compassion. That it's not something that's in a big, if I don't do this, I won't get healed, or having all those I would say pressure that we put upon ourselves. So thank you for that reminder, and thank you for joining for this today.
Oh, it was such a pleasure. My final thought, I think, is little steps along the way that started to nudge the way that I thought, the way that I felt, the way that I took care of myself. And they compound over time to give a new way of being. So please don't sign up to anything for thousands of pounds that's going to give you the magic fix.
Yeah. Oh, definitely agree with that. Little steps create that big steps.
Wonderful.
Thank you,
Thank you so much,
Sam.
Lana. My pleasure.